Hello and welcome to Game and Gadget podcast number 26. I'm your host, James Woodcock, and of course you can find many more of our podcasts over at pixelrefresh.com. We're on all the popular podcasting audio solutions like Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple, whoever's got one, it's probably on there, so just search for it and find the Game and Gadget podcast. But of course, I am joined by my co-host, Tony Warriner. Thank you for joining me again, Tony.
Nice to be here, thank you.
And becoming more and more of a regular visitor to the Game and Gadget podcast, I also have Steve Ince. Welcome back, Steve.
Hi, it's good of you to invite me again.
Absolute pleasure to have you here, Steve. So, it's been quite a while since we've recorded a podcast, so we'll definitely make the most of this time together. So I'll dive in straight away if I may, gents, and talk about one of my latest retro acquisitions, which came out of the blue. So I was in this situation where my wife didn't know what to get me for Christmas. And I didn't know what I would want either. So I got to the point of how many slippers can you get? How many socks can you have? We're not going to go down this route. I just said, hold off, love, hold off. And we'll see what comes up in the crystal ball of James's Christmas gift buying ideas. And lo and behold, after Christmas, after being a patient person, a colleague from work said, my stepdad has a retro console, which he's thinking of getting rid of. And I thought of you because of your retro inclinations. I said, well, thank you very much. What is it? And he says, it's an Intellivision. And to be honest, I'd heard of the Intellivision, not really seen them in action or ever, certainly never owned one, and knew very little about it. And a few pennies later, thanks to my wife, I am now the owner of an Intellivision. You can probably see it over my shoulder. And it's from the UK anyway. It would be around the very early 80s, which is ironically where I'll be born as well. So kind of rivaling the era of the Atari 2600, that sort of thing. But what's quite novel about it is it came with quite a few games, all boxed, such as this one. I've got a Star Wars game behind me as well. But what this also came with is a voice synthesizer box, which you would plug in. Now, unfortunately, I've not had time to actually turn this on and experiment with it yet, but I'm so excited to see what on earth a voice synthesizer from the early 80s will sound like on a console. Apparently, only a few games supported it, but luckily, I have one of those games and the voice synthesis module, and I have no idea how rare that is, but I think it was about £80 back then. So it wasn't a small acquisition. So to have the Intellivision with one of those and at least one game that supports it, I think is going to be quite a fun thing. And the game I'm holding right now is something called B-17 Bomber. And of course, the controllers move away from your Xbox controllers and all these dual analog sticks and things like that. This is the era when you could put an inlay over the controller buttons. And it would be like your guide of what button you needed to press. So forget A, B, X, and Y. You had a little graphic bit of artwork you'd put over your buttons. And I think there's about 9. I can't look over my shoulder because I'm all plugged in for sound now. But then that would guide you of what you needed to press.
Kind of early tooltip.
Yes, exactly that. But it's all in excellent condition. I'm so impressed. It's come in this state, and it's most have the manuals as well. And it's just such considering it's early 80s, I'm just flabbergasted it's in such good condition. So the previous owner/owners must have really looked after it. And of course, it's got a cartridge, instant loading. That's going to be fun. But it probably will need to be modded to get at least composite output because it'll be standard RF out of the box. And RF signals do not survive very well with all the interference that we have nowadays, which you didn't have back then. So the pitch would really suffer, even though it wasn't particularly great at the time. So that's something I'll probably look at fairly soon. But yeah, I don't know what you guys know about an Intellivision or consoles from that era. What do you think? What do you know?
I'd heard of it, but that's as far as my knowledge goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of a round, wasn't it? Wasn't it like table? What are they called? It's really it's really blocky stuff. Yeah, it's like really.
Yeah, so this would be just after like the Pong era where you beep 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 beep.
Yeah, I mean they call those TV games, didn't they? They were like TV games for like a year before real computers arrived or something. Is it one of those, or is it slightly better than that?
It's better. Well, the fact, if you imagine the early sort of Pong consoles, it was literally you had 5 different game variations, but it was just the console. There was no way of plugging a cartridge in or anything like that. There'd probably be a switch on the console. You'd say, do I want to play ping pong? Yes. Do I want to play football? Yes. It's exactly the same game with an ever so minor tweak, but that's football, man. Do you want to play tennis? It's exactly the same game with an ever so slightly tweak, but it's tennis. So that was back then. But then, of course, there's cartridge-based consoles, which, you know, this would originally come out in North America in sort of 1979 time. So cartridges and all that sort of thing, it was just really starting to become a thing when people were starting to learn to blow in the cartridge, which apparently does absolutely nothing. But still, this is a thing we were trained to do. If your cartridge doesn't work, you must blow on the cartridge. But that's another story. But yeah, it would just be sitting, I guess, after that sort of Pong era. And then this would be like the next phase where you could actually get a true separate game and it just not be a switch on the console itself to switch.
Wasn't it Philips, was it?
As in television or in general?
No, I mean television. Was that a Philips brand?
I don't think so. This is where James rushes out. No, it's Mattel. It's Mattel Electronics.
Right. Yeah. That rings a bell.
So apparently development began in 1977. It was released in North America in 1979. Came to the UK probably about 81 time, which is the year I was born. But looking at some of the websites where they have like a comparison of this against the Atari 2600, which was phenomenally successful, the Intellivision generally has the better graphics. It does, apparently. According to our friend, the interweb. So I'm really excited in trying it. And I would have loved to have tried it before this podcast, but maybe you can see the excitement, at least, of the anticipation. And then in the next podcast, you'll go, oh, it's all right. So at least you're seeing the excitement part before my dreams are blown and my rose-tinted glasses. But I'm hoping I'm going to be blown away by what this is capable of for that time.
I don't think you are.
Well, as long as I go with some kind of realistic vision of this, it's certainly not going to be... This is not Unreal Engine 5, folks. This is some lines on a screen with very primitive sounds. But still, it's a nice thing to have in my collection. And like I say, it's in fantastic quality.
Yeah. I mean, one thing is that the actual games will be quite good fun.
I hope so. I've got enough of them to try. It's not like I've only got one. There must be at least 10.
I mean, with that kind of spec, there weren't anywhere to hide really. You know, if your game wasn't actually good fun to play, there was not like you were sort of distracting people with graphics or whatever, which is the modern way.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I mean, if we fast forward,
I think the games, sort of from the whole of that era, well, probably well into the into the 90s as well. Sort of they had to be good gameplay, didn't they? It was only with the advent of sort of better graphics in early to mid 90s that you could get away with sort of less quality gameplay.
Yeah, other things.
Well, I guess it's a bit similar when you think of text-based adventures, where it was literally just text on a screen and you were interactive and you were trying to find the correct verb to get something to happen. And you were guessing. But, there was nothing graphical on the screen for those at all. It was just pure text, but it still captured your imagination. So, the earliest consoles, yes, the graphics to our standards, was being incredibly primitive. But still, it was in its own way, at least representing something, and you could tell that was a ship, and that was something firing, and you needed to protect this block thing over there. This block with little things on the side. Oh, that's a spider, mate. Don't worry about it. You need to get that. That's a mushroom. Couldn't you tell? So, yeah, the graphics are certainly going to be very different to anything we might play now. I mean, our mobile phones even 10 years ago will be wildly more powerful than what this thing can do as this big console. But, it's of the time, of the era. It's a lovely thing to have the collection and the speech synthesis thing. I know it's going to be terrible. But the fact it even existed as a thing you could buy in the early 80s, and someone went out and brought it for 80 quid. Maybe they got it in a sale later on, who knows? But, that is not a small proposition. It's not a small bit of change to go out and buy something like that.
Yeah, but I don't think anything was in those days, was it? I mean, you look back to, sort of like a Commodore 64. I mean, I remember buying the C64 system early 80s, and that was like 250 quid or something. Back then, that was an awful lot of money. If you sort of like scale it up.
It wasn't that bad though, was it? I mean, the BBC Micro was 400. That was a lot. I mean, a ZX81 was, what were they, 120, I think? I mean, it weren't bad, was it? Considering you went from no computers whatsoever to, and you for 120 quid, yes, you could buy one. I mean, I know it's inflation and all that, but someone should work it out what it actually would be. But it's still in that bad. It was doable, wasn't it? Like four. I remember 400 for a BBC Micro wasn't, but I mean, my beloved Lynx was 225, which wasn't bad, It wasn't unattainable.
It's a marvelous time period, wasn't it, where there was so much competition, which helped keep prices down, and there were so many aiming for a particular price point to be like the best value proposition for what you get. And Amstrad will come in and say, "Hey, look, don't buy this one machine. You can get this one with a full keyboard and green screen monitor for the same price." Now, do your best Alan Sugar impression you want at this point. But the point is, there was so much competition, so much innovation, people trying to push that little bit further, trying to outdo each other. And it was all a very new era of time where people could have a computer in the home. Not a lot of businesses, I guess, in the UK had a good computer setup, but now you could even get them in the home to do some sort of basic Word documentation and whatnot.
Yeah, because everyone was doing their accounts on it.
Indeed. Well, I do find it fascinating how, you go to the earliest consoles and they were cartridge based, which had the advantage of instant loading. Or I should say, there was no real loading. You turned it on, the game was there ready to play. And then we went from cartridge to tape. Now, anyone sort of from America will be thinking, tape? We were more into the whole disc world. But in terms of UK, we seem to be we are the tape guys. It was more affordable, even if we had to sit waiting through these rather epileptic, enduring loading screens with the flickering going on screen rapidly as you waited 5-10 minutes for your game to load. And then we went to floppy, which, again, certainly not instant loading. Bigger capacity, fine, but certainly not instant loading. And then that was your computer route. It was only the consoles that really stuck with cartridges, right up to, the Nintendo 64, which was hanging on for sheer delight as much as it could, while other consoles were taking up the CD-ROM format, which, did sort of put Nintendo in the corner as they couldn't keep up with that capacity on a cartridge-based system. But, the loading was far quicker. So that is an interesting trend, isn't it? Going from a cartridge, instant loading, and somehow advancing to go to slower methods of loading in that information.
Well, it was about capacity, wasn't it? The chips, the ROM chips were too expensive, so you couldn't keep up with the required memory needed. You couldn't. Remember, Steve, when we did GBA Sword when we had 8 meg. Well, that's that's a fraction of a CD-ROM, isn't it? Fraction.
We had to do a lot of squeezing to get that, didn't we?
Well, they were trying to. I mean, they were going crazy, but they were trying to knock us down to 4 meg because of the price of the cartridge. So I mean, that's why cartridges died, because they were just too expensive when it came to any kind of usable capacity.
In what kind of reality, though? I mean, 8 megabytes sounds like a ridiculously small amount of space for what was originally a CD-ROM game. Where did the thinking go that, oh yeah, 4 will work?
Well, I mean, the publishers they're going to go back and do the maths, aren't they? They do the maths and they go, no, it's too expensive, and they throw it back at you to see if anything will give. We were probably doing the opposite. We were saying we want the next one up, which was probably 16, which I don't think any game ever came on. I think there was a 32 as well, like theoretically, but they were just so expensive that you couldn't do it. I mean, most GBA games were 2 meg. A lot of them were 1 meg. Some were 2. Quite a lot were, probably majority were 2 meg, or a few more 4 meg. Very few people got permission to go up to 8 because it was just the unit cost was so much more. I mean, they weren't happy. They kept pushing back, but I mean, there was just no way. It was just absolutely no way it could have been done.
So it wasn't some shrewd marketing or sort of negotiating tactic to say, we'd like 16. We need 16, just so they think 8 was a good compromise. Or was it really that, we can't imagine doing it to 8?
It was both, really. Yeah. I mean, if they'd said, all right, then 16, I mean, our lives would have been easier, wouldn't they? But it did make their calls for 4 to be much more unreasonable at the same time. So, yeah, it was a negotiation, I guess.
So let's hypothesize. If they'd have said back then, here's 16, how much do you think the game might have changed?
Probably not all that much. It just might have been slightly easier to do. I mean, we might have had more animation in it, I guess, and a few more things would have.
That was the main thing
around the side,
wasn't it?
Yeah, we had to hack the. Well, we did 2 things, didn't we? We hacked the number of interactions and away from the main route, and we cut the animations back quite hard. So I guess both of those things would have been slightly more relaxed. We'd have never got all the voices or the music in still, so that part of it wouldn't have changed.
I guess you only needed one line in it anyway. Paris in the fall.
Well, there was 12,000 in the base game, so.
So you mean this 4K cartridge I've got right here wouldn't have been enough for something like that? 4K.
Not Breton Sword, no. But you could do a lot in 4K. I mean, ZX81 games, they did a lot of great things in 1K, didn't they? 16 made a lot of difference. I mean, most of them started coming on because everyone had a 16K RAM pack. You could do a lot in 16K on a ZX81. In the same way you can do a lot in 48K on a Spectrum. 48K was the right amount. You could do a great game in 48K.
So do you think greater capacity did open up? I mean, certainly for something like a point-and-click adventure game, having the Talkie version, the CD-ROM was an absolute necessity to store all that speech, because it was the speech that probably took up more than anything for a lot of games.
At the time, yeah, there was no other alternative. I mean, if you look at Steel Sky, it was 14 floppies, wasn't it? So Steel Sky is a much smaller game than Broken Sword, so it would have been, if it had been floppies, it would have been, I don't know, what do you think, 4 times, Steve? It would have been 30-odd discs, probably, 30-odd floppy discs. Imagine swapping them in and out as you go back between Paris and Spain and Syria.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not.
Disc number 19, please.
It's bad enough. Well, do you remember, I mean, the only real point-and-click adventure game I really played with floppy disk was the Simon the Sorcerer, and I think that was about 9. And they did it in such a way, as I'm sure you did with Beneath a Steel Sky. They tried to make it as careful as possible to reduce the amount of swapping that was required, which must have took some really good forward planning and thinking which route the player is most likely to take.
Depends on the design, doesn't it? I mean, if the design's linear and you literally progress from one thing to the next, then it's quite easy. I mean, we had a lot. We were trying to be clever with our design, so you could go back up and down the levels in Beneath Still Sky. Beneath Still Sky. So that meant backtracking through the discs. It was quite difficult. It was quite difficult to organize.
Simon the Sorcerer. It was, you could explore, and there was always bits where you were cut off and you had to complete a puzzle to get further. But you had the village, then you could walk into the forest, and the forest was pretty vast. And you could go up the forest, you could down the forest, right, left, diagonally. There was loads of little bits to it. And I can't remember thinking, oh, there's another floppy disk change here. It wasn't that bad. It didn't really hurt me in any way. It only hurt me in that game when I got to, I think it was like floppy disk 7, and was just 2 floppy disks away from completing the game. And the floppy disk had corrupted.
Oh, grief.
I know. So on floppy disk, I never completed the game, and that was on the Acorn Archimedes A3010. So it's one of the reasons I got the CD-ROM version for the PC. That was the main reason I got a PC, folks, so I could play the Talkie version of Simon the Sorcerer, because the floppy version let me down on the Acorn Archimedes. And by the way, there was a CD version for the Acorn Archimedes, although apparently the Talkie quality of that wasn't as good as the PC version, or the Amiga version, which also had a CD version. It was just the way the Acorn was interpreting that audio recording. It wasn't quite making it as good as it could be. So, and that's what got me a 486 PC in the end. I bought the game before I got the computer.
I'm amazed there was an Acorn version, actually.
There's quite a few Amiga titles that did make it to the Acorn. Cannon Fodder, which when Stu was on, we were talking about. That was always great on the Acorn. Wolfenstein 3D is probably one of the bigger shockers. That was also on there. And then there was Lemmings, and then there was like the unique titles that Acorn had. It was Starfighter or something like that, which was pretty well known for that platform. But there's certainly quite a few crossing over, but you didn't have like the Mortal Kombats and things like that.
Yeah, it was very short-lived as well, wasn't it?
It was, and it was such a great computer. I was the outside kid who didn't have the Atari ST, didn't have the Amiga. I'm the one with the Acorn Archimedes. But screw everybody else, because this was the one that helped but the ARM revolution, the RISC chip. So that's my claim to fame, to having that computer back in the day.
There's nothing wrong with being different, James.
No, absolutely not. But although I would have liked an Amiga, I mean, I was quite lucky. My best friend who lived over the road had an Amiga 500. No, sorry, I take it back. It was Amiga A600. So that was the more compact version without the numeric keys on the side. And we did have a lot of fun on that. But I did love my Acorn. And it was so advantageous because my school, which would have been, 1996 time? Hadn't quite gone into the PC revolution just yet, and they'd got Acorn Archimedes. So when I went into IT, which I thought, this is very exciting, for its half a GCSE, IT wasn't qualified as a full GCSE back then, it was half a GCSE. But one of the first questions the teacher asked in our very first lesson was, can anyone tell me what the names of the mouse buttons are on this computer? I'm thinking, how would anyone really know that unless they'd ever used one? So I just put my hand up and went, yep, select, menu, adjust. And he went, I know I'm not going to have any problems with you, James. And that's all I can remember from that school in terms of IT. So whatever else he taught, whatever else he taught me in IT, I'm sure it was very valuable. But that's all I can remember him going, I couldn't say I'm not having any problems with you, James, just because I know it's select, menu, and adjust.
I think if the teacher of the IT class needs just someone to press the mouse buttons, then it's maybe not going to be the most advanced IT course ever constructed, is it? Yeah,
but I was very jealous because he had a computer with a hard drive, which at the time, what's this hard drive? It stores so many different applications and games on it. This is insane. Floppy disk, forget it. He's got a hard drive. I never saw CD-ROM in the wild, though. That was definitely a rarity. And there was even a chap who lived fairly local who specialised in sort of Acorn computers, like selling the software and the hardware and fixing them up. And when I said, I want the CD-ROM drive, because again, I was thinking Simon the Sorcerer. He said, what do you want one of those for? I thought, well, I want to play this game. It's got talking in it. Well, surely you want a hard drive first. Everything will load fast. You can store more stuff. No, I want a CD-ROM drive. he just couldn't understand. I think this was another reason I got a PC, folks.
He was probably right.
Well, yeah, in hindsight, he probably was right. But still, I was young. I wanted to play Simon the Sorcerer full Talkie edition. And I'm sure those Beneath a Still Sky is a good example there. So you could have got the floppy disk version, which had no talking in it, but you could have also got the CD-ROM version with talking in it. I wonder how the sales split was on that, because it was still very new to have CD-ROM drives around that time.
Well, the CD version came a bit later, didn't it, Steve?
Yeah, yeah. Well, wasn't it the
CD? Well, they paid us to do CD32, didn't they?
Yeah, that's it.
So that was literally the first version that had the talkie in it then?
It was one of the first talking games, to be honest.
Right, okay.
That was its claim to fame. It was the first. There would have been others, but it was the first. It was a proper game with lots and lots and lots of speech in it, and it was one of the. I think we always thought it was the first. Someone will prove that wrong, but it wasn't far off.
Well, it certainly wasn't something that was planned, was it? In development,
No.
We just kind of like released the floppy version, and then it was kind of like, perhaps this is something that we can do. And I can't remember how that came about, but it was certainly something, sort of very much not an afterthought, but after planning, if you like. But we had a nightmare with the voices. I don't know if you remember, Tom. They sent us all these DAT tapes, and we had to actually cut them up in the office.
All right.
There was no automatic systems back then to cut them up and top and tail them and stuff. So we had to do it all by hand. And I went through most of them and did them. And then they decided they wanted to re-record some of the voices. So
no.
we, I think Virgin actually took on the task of cutting the newer ones up. But it was a lot of work.
So when you say cutting it up, what do you actually mean there? What was the actual physical process for that? It
was just all the lines were recorded onto a series of DAT tapes, like one after another.
Yep.
So then we had to kind of get them onto the computer, and cut them up into the separate individual lines and give them a reference number or however we name them, so that they could sort of the would play at the same time as the text line was displayed. So it wasn't like nowadays you go into a studio and sort of like you're pressing buttons to key every each line, and you can optimize them in all sorts of cool ways and all this kind of thing. We just given these DAT tapes and told to cut them up.
And would that have had all the outtakes as well, and all the different variations of the same line?
I don't really remember many variations, and certainly not any outtakes that I remember. But yeah.
So you didn't hear the director in the corner, louder, he's in distress, or anything like that. It was just the pure voice.
Yeah.
But how did that feel, putting a voice to a game where originally it was just reading text on the screen as they spoke? Did it feel like it was somehow changing the nature of the game, or did you think it added a tangible benefit?
Well, the games, I talked about this quite a lot, and the games really only ever came to life on the day you put the voices in. When you have a broken sword, and it's voiceless right until the end, to be honest, because you can't record until everything's done, so and frozen to the point where it's never ever going to change again. So in effect, you have a final game in terms of gameplay before you can record. So you go through 99% of development on a text-based game, and then on that fateful day when the voices go in, it pops into life right at the end, last possible minute. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I think it was quite significant with Beneath the Steel Sky, because although sort of the text had been written with a lot of humor in mind, suddenly you get all these great characters coming through even more with these recorded voices, and some of them were just brilliant. In fact, most of them were really, and there's such variety of accents and all this kind of thing, sort of like Lamb with his Yorkshire accent, and then there was, sort of Welsh accents and Brummie accents and all sorts, and it was just sort of this rich melee of voices.
Was that expected though? I mean, were they looking for characters? We're looking for a Brummie. It's got to be a Brummie, otherwise it's not going to be this character. Or was that just like you listen to that DAT tape one day and go, "Oh, okay, he's a Brummie"?
I think it is what happens when you have like a very small number of slightly drunk actors, and the way they're going to do different characters is to change the accent. I think that's the near the truth of it.
So do you think?
I think sort of it was quite common, sort of in the early days of game voice recording to use a few actors and have them do different voices. Sort of, and often they became silly as a result of that. I think that Steel Sky actually, I think the quality is quite high in respect to a lot of other games that were just silly.
Well, that reminds me of Discworld, because that had some really famous actors involved with that production. So, for is it Bill Pertwee? It was Wurzel Gummidge, and Tony Robinson, who is still alive and kicking. Probably best known for Time Team and Baldrick from Blackadder. He was in it. Eric Idle, who's sort of Monty Python fame. So Eric Idle was Rince-Rind, but then Tony Robinson would have not just done one character voice, he would have done several spread throughout the game. Same for Bill Pertwee, and is it Rob Brydon? I think he was a few voices in it as well. So
he could do a few voices.
He can do a few voices, that's for sure. But they spread that out to make sure they got as many characters filled by those three actors. And I think it was just Eric Idle who did Rince-Rind. I don't think he did any other characters in that game because it's so distinctive. It's Eric Idle just by listening to him talk. But in terms of atmospherics then, do you think having like Broken Sword 1, you would have then heard the music that was created lovingly for it? You would have heard the voice cast. Do you think when Broken Sword 2 came about, that helped you set in your mind that you hadn't got the dialogue finished yet? Even if you were just seeing the text of it, you then heard George Stobart, and that kind of influenced some of those decisions and animations and storyboarding and whatever else.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, we were familiar with the main characters, so I mean, we knew how to handle them, I guess. But it was still waiting for the real voices in terms of the pop, to bring it to life. But I mean, yeah, I mean, yes and no. From a design point of view, it was clearer what the characters would do and what they'd be like. But the actual physical manifestation of them in the game didn't really happen until the voices went in as well. I think. Would you agree, Steve?
I think that. I mean, I think a lot of development is really about sort of pulling together all of these different resources, isn't it? You've got this engine to create. You've got the kind of like the tools that you need to create in order that artists and writers and implementers and everybody can put this game together. And a lot of the time, you're not really thinking about the characters as such. It's only when you start getting it much more complete, the characters are definitely talking to each other and so on. You can see how the lines are coming through, sort of. And having a previous game with voices does help, I mean, it certainly helps you write those characters, or the characters that are coming back better. Like George and Nico and stuff. I mean, sort of like when I was writing on Broken Sword 3, I went back to the first one to ensure I had the voice of George in my head and the voice of Nico, even though we weren't using the same actress. Sort of, I still think of Nico as being the Nico from Broken Sword 1. Sort of, and it just helps that, and on other projects that I've worked on, if there's been a second one in the series, sort of having established the first one just gives you, sort of an ease of writing for those characters, knowing that they've been established.
Makes sense to me. So what was the deal behind the voice change in Nico? Was that just scheduling, or was it something else?
I'm not entirely sure.
Availability, I think.
Yeah,
I would think. I mean, there was no reason not to have. Who did the first one? Was it Hazel did the first one?
Yeah,
I think Hazel did the first one. There was no reason not to have her do the second. I mean, I'm sure she was asked to do it, and then she was doing something else or didn't want to do it or something. But, I mean, there was never a problem with it, so we would have asked her, I'm sure.
I'm guessing it couldn't have been a problem in any way, because she came back later for the director's cut, which had the extended bit at the start with her. Yeah. It was all Nico at the start.
Yeah. I mean, at one point she was going to do Broken Sword 5, and it didn't work out for similar reasons, But she was hanging around in the office for a bit because she was going to do the voices, So I think she did. Yeah, she did. She actually did Nico in the Kickstarter film, so she does actually appear in Broken Sword 5 in a roundabout sort of way. So it's just logistics, I think.
One of the problems that we often get in games is that you don't know exactly when you're going to be able to lock down the text and do the recording. I mean, you have a kind of aim, we're aiming for the end of October, say, or something like this. But it's probably not until a few weeks before that you start to kind of like be able to say, oh yeah, it's definitely the last week in October or what have you. And it might be too short notice for some of the actors, particularly if they're getting a lot of voice work.
Yeah.
I mean, when we did Broken Sword 3, Rolf was actually appearing on stage in Chicago, was it? Stage production of Chicago. So he was recording during the day with us, and then going off to to perform on stage in the evening. God, his voice must have been, sort of absolutely worn out by the end of that fortnight.
So what is the general sort of turnaround time for, you've locked in the dialogue, you know exactly what the characters need to say. How long do you usually have to wait before it comes back in some sort of form you can use?
These days, it's days. It literally is, because they're so, the studios are so optimized to deliver that often they can be delivering, like if you've done 1 day's recording, and then an engineer somewhere will kind of oversee that and be making sure all the samples are correctly numbered and stuff like this, and then I know some studios actually feed it back into their system. So if there's any, like you might record one actor at a time, so that actor's lines can then be fed in to the other actors, sort of for the rest of the production. So they're feeding in those lines to cue them in. So if you're the first one to record, you don't get any of that direct feed, but others do, So it's very clever what they're doing in studios these days.
It must be very hard to sort of react or act to nothing, because if you're just seeing the printed text on a page, and I'm sure that there's probably some direction on then what's happening at the time, and
not just that. I mean, you'll get somebody feeding the lines, sort of either the voice director or somebody else. I mean, I've done it myself when I've been in the studio, just to give the actor, sort of the right cue. And it kind of creates a flow and an energy and stuff like this that you wouldn't get if they were just reading them dry.
Does that mean you were doing your full-on Shakespeare there then, Steve, to get the very best out of the voice actors?
You ever tried it, Steve? It's really difficult.
What, the acting?
To actually act. Yeah. I mean, I
was in a couple of things at school. One of which was The Imaginary Invalid by, Miles Molière or something. Molière. I can't remember his first name. But anyway, it was a French thing that was translated into English, and we did it. And I had a sort of a reasonably substantial role, and it was, had a lot of fun. But I wouldn't call myself an actor.
You'd think it'd be easy, wouldn't you? But when we did the Kickstarter video for Broken Sword 5, I mean, we had that script that so there was George, who was going to be talking to his virtual George, obviously, and talking to real Charles. So Charles had to do his lines and had them recorded, but so he needed prompting. So like I had to go at doing the George lines, and it was just pitifully bad. How like you'd think it'd be easy to do it properly, but it just couldn't make it work. It was like, holy, why doesn't this work? Why can't I act? It must be easy, but it's not. It's like when you try it, it's really difficult.
And a lot of people think that sort of acting is just about putting on a silly voice or an angry voice or something like this, and it's just not. I mean, a lot of good actors, particularly voice actors, like in games, we don't see the actor themselves. We see these avatars that are talking with these actors' voices. So they have to put quite a lot over, in the voice, because we don't have the subtlety of facial expressions. We don't have, sort of the subtleties of body language in most games. And so, that voice has got to carry an awful lot. But a lot of them have very rich voices as well. There's kind of almost, sort of multiple layers, going on, that make the rest of us sound quite dull in comparison. Or at least myself, I think. But they, it's like Rolf. I mean, you take Rolf and how easily he does the George voice, and he just slips into it, and he can just go almost all day and hardly make any mistakes because he can get into that character, and that is a major part of it is getting into the character and understanding why he says things in a certain way and such. And it's not an easy thing. I mean, most actors have gone through an awful lot of training to get to where they are. So
yeah.
So if you don't think you're very good, it's because you haven't gone through that. Sort of, and there's nothing wrong with not being good at something if you haven't had the training.
Yeah.
So you're telling me, Tony, out of all the point and click adventures you've been involved with that have had Talkie, there's not a single line of dialogue featuring your voice?
No. I've been thinking about this game I'm writing at the moment. It's going to have a lot of voicing in it, a lot of speech in it, and it'd be nice to record it. I mean, if there's a budget from somewhere, it'd be good to record it. But how to do that, or who's going to do it, and could I do one of the roles? Maybe I could do one of the roles, but could I? I don't know. Be interesting to try it.
It was.
I'm quite interested in the idea of acting, but I mean, I've tried it off camera and couldn't do it at all. But it feels like something that's bugging me now. I want to kind of learn. I want to learn about. Apparently, if you're writing characters, it's a good thing to understand about acting.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, certainly, one of the biggest things that they recommend if you're writing dialogue is to read your dialogue out loud. Sort of, because that's when you'll pick up whether the lines are sound right, sound natural, or if they're just going to be awkward for the actors to say. because if you have a lot of lines with that are very sibilant, a lot of S's, then they're going to fall over those kind of things. So you have to kind of make adjustments to how the lines are going to be read, sort of. And I suppose in one sense with Steel Sky, you weren't thinking like that because all you were thinking, like Dave Cummins, who wrote the original lines. I mean, he would have just written them knowing that they were going to be displayed on screen as text. Sort of he wasn't thinking about, writing them for performance. Yet when Broken Sword came along, we knew that we would be recording them at some point. So he will have approached it slightly differently, I presume. So it's kind of, I don't know. I always think, I always try and put it in my head that yes, an actor is going to be speaking these lines, sort of try and make them not simple, but clear. You don't want the actors, sort of stopping every line and going, what does this actually mean? Because it breaks up the flow,
So, okay, Tony, we haven't got any lines of dialogue. We're making your new game. But you do have a claim to fame in the game. So there is in Broken Sword 1 a Warriner safe.
There is.
Have you got any other sort of Easter eggs you've snuck in there with Warriner in it? Or was that the only one?
There's quite a few Easter eggs across all the games, I suppose. A lot of them which were done by me. There's one in there's the spooky room in Director's Cut as well, where you look through a window and you see a sort of montage of bits and bobs. I did that one. There's all sorts of crap in there.
All sorts of crap. This is how we define Easter eggs.
Throw some crap in. Yeah.
Bonus content, I believe, is the term you're looking for.
I think my original Obsidian sprite's actually in the Director's Cut, hidden away through that keyhole thing. Yeah, there's all sorts in there.
What about you, Steve? What did you sneak in over the years where you thought, oh, maybe no one will notice this, I'll just stick this in? Was there anything you've got a claim to fame for?
I tend to kind of like go for more subtle things in the text. I might make a reference to a book or another game, but in a very subtle way. Sort of, it might just be something that I know, and nobody's ever come back and said, I saw that. Yeah, I quite like it. So I'm probably being too subtle. But
actually, there's that 80 reference guide Easter egg in the Director's Cut. That's spoken lines of text that I wrote as well. Yay! I forgot about that. So yes, I wrote some dialogue.
It's just one step away from actually speaking it yourself.
Yep.
If not, we'll just use this voice synthesizer module from the early 80s and see how that goes instead.
Well, a lot of these characters are going to be robots, so it's probably going to be spot on for that. Yeah,
I'll get recording it.
Come on,
I probably
James,
can't give it any lines myself. That's the only problem.
That would be quite cool, though, wouldn't it? Going back and using that old tech to create one of the voices for the game. That would be really cool.
They do that a lot in music, don't they? They're digging out 70s Moogs and things to get the right warmth of sound and stuff. James will know about all that stuff.
Oh yes, oh absolutely. No, is it vocoders or something like that they use? I mean, even the keyboard behind me, you can plug in a microphone and alter the pitch by whatever you're playing, or add a harmony. So I have to say, I'm not much of a singer. My wife would disagree, but I'm going to stick with this line. I'm not much of a singer. And I would sing one note, and then I'd play a chord on the keyboard, and then the keyboard would then create that as a harmony. I mean, my goodness. Now, if you ask me, don't worry, Tony, if you're ever going to say, James, can you record me some dialogue for a game, I'm not going to go all operatic on you. I've always wanted to give this a go, and funnily enough, probably about a year ago, I thought about auditioning for a game. But it was probably a really difficult one to start with. It was like an ethereal character. It was more like a spirit. And I was trying to. I think I was overthinking because I wasn't just thinking I've got to do my voice. It sounds ethereal. I've got to maybe add some special effects, a layer on the top of it, which is a skill in itself to then get that right. So I didn't send it in the end. But I also remember years ago, before Monkey Island officially had a talkie track, because that was certainly years and years later. Monkey Island was forever text on the screen until they did like an official sort of, I don't think they called it a remaster as such, but it came back with newer graphics where you could switch between the new and the old, and you could have a talkie version. But before that became a thing, there was like a fan project where they were saying, please, can you audition for all these different characters? I didn't want to be a pirate. I don't think I could pull off a pirate voice. And if you asked me to do my normal voice, I think I'd be okay, because I know I could stay with that normal voice. But if you asked me to do an accent, I would drift into something else entirely, and it becomes something else. So, but there was a dog, and I auditioned for the dog, and I'm semi-convinced if the talkie version officially didn't get announced around this same time, I might have been the dog in the unofficial fan version of this.
Second dog.
You could have heard me barking. Doing
that you're barking
and all that stuff. Obviously, I did a lot more effort into it than that. But, I was so close. And I thought, I could be in a game. And it didn't happen. Damn you, official.
Yeah. You're talking about pirates there. I mean, sort of a lot of people used to, that same, sort of like, matey kind of.
And that's what I didn't want to do.
Pirate voice. And it's, sort of, because I had a pirate character in So Blonde, and he was obviously the bad guy of the piece, and he was called One Eye, and funny little character he was. And I just didn't want that traditional pirate voice, so I actually talked to one of the actors when we were auditioning, actors for the voices. I said, I just don't want a traditional pirate voice for this. And he had a bit of a think, and he said, what if I do a voice that's a bit, Richard Burton-like? I mean, he didn't, kind of like take off Richard Burton, but he kind of added that kind of,
it was influenced,
tones and subtleties. And it just worked so well. It was perfect for the part. Because you've got this funny little character with one eye and a wooden leg doing this quite serious Richard Burton style voice, and it was perfect. So sometimes the actors just bring something that kind of you would never have thought of just from the writing alone.
Well, I'm glad you didn't go just for the stereotypical pirate, which I think was influenced essentially by a film, wasn't it? There was one film where this actor did that kind of "arr" and all that business, and then every pirate then had to be "arr."
It was Treasure Island, and
yes, that's it. Yeah,
and Robert Newton, who played Long John Silver, he put on that voice, and everybody's associated it with pirates ever since.
Oh, "arr,"
because they all came from like Cornwall, didn't they?
Yeah.
Oh dear. That's what you need in a game. Someone from Cornwall giving directions. I'm not even attempt it, don't worry. I'm not going to do the accent. I'll just upset people. And I won't pull it off faithfully anyway. But yeah, I'm glad you didn't go the stereotypical route and you tried something different, because one eye, false leg, that's pirate territory right there. But then the voice was different. Good on you, Steve. Good on you. You broke the trend. So in your game, Tony, what kind of dialects can we expect?
I think East Yorkshire.
East Yorkshire. That's me out then.
Yeah, get some nice Hull people in there, sort of. No, mate.
Yeah, no.
You don't want any Nottingham in there then, unfortunately. You're out, my duck. Yeah.
Are you from Nottingham, James?
Originally, yeah. Spent most of my life there.
Yeah.
So I've probably got a Nottingham twang in there somewhere. But in terms, I don't think I have a heavy dialect. There may be certain words that you can maybe pick up a sort of Midlands type accent, but I don't think I'm sort of heavily thick in any accent. Maybe some people might say I'm heavily thick, but that's another conversation altogether. But in terms of accents, no. Maybe that's an advantage. Maybe it's more neutral. Maybe it lends itself. Maybe I need to sell my voice apparatus, Mr. Warriner. Maybe I need to audition for this fantastic game. And then you say, James, I need it very robotic.
Depends if you can be a robot or not, but yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Are they evil robots? Are they friendly robots? Give me my definition of roboticness. Is it Skynet or is it something a little bit more friendly? Is it Mac OS?
It's I don't know. I think
I put him on the spot now. What is my motivation?
there's a lot of swearing.
Oh, really? A robotic swear? Okay.
Everybody swears. Yeah.
Even robots.
Effing and blinding. You wouldn't believe
like
what robots are like. Rust off. Yeah. There's a lot of that. A lot of offs.
So is this for comedic effect, or is it just because these are very serious robots that have attitude?
Yeah, they're just people don't realize that robots swear. Why wouldn't they? You know.
Maybe one of these robots has a glitch though, so it's not actually swearing; it's something else. Think back to "Hello, Hello, Gentlemen," where there was a policeman who said his French was very good, but it was all wrong. But it was all said in English, but you could tell he was trying to do French. It's very bizarre. Unless you've watched the program, it won't make any sense whatsoever. But maybe your robots need to have, or at least the one that swears a lot, has a glitch. So all the swearing, we know it's swearing, but isn't quite swearing. It's done in a clever way.
Like a kind of technical Tourette's.
Yes, why not?
Do you remember what was it? The comedy thing, Red Dwarf, where he couldn't actually swear, could he? That was actually quite funny.
Yeah,
because he just couldn't do it. He was like, it's a nice idea.
Hence Smeg.
Yeah, it was clever that. But you remember also, to go back even further, Blake 7. I think all the robots in Blake 7 were extremely posh, weren't they? They were proper Shakespearean RP robots, every single one of them.
Yeah, well, Blake himself was a very sort of well-known theatrical actor, wasn't he? And and he left after about, was it the first series or something?
He did, yeah. He came back later, didn't he?
I think he didn't like it and cleared off, and so they called themselves Blake 7, even though Blake had gone.
Yeah, and there weren't even 7.
Yeah, I think
people is a lesson.
I think there was a lot of kind of jobs for friends, wasn't there, in some of these productions? Yeah.
It was very cheap as well, very cheap.
Yeah, some of the acting was awful.
It was, wasn't it? We watched some of it recently, and I remembered it from being a kid, and I thought it was the best thing ever. And you go back and watch it, and you're going, "My God, this should be cut to at least half the length." And the acting was, it was just awful. And the funny thing about bad acting is you look at it and you can't understand what's bad about it. Like, you couldn't tell them what to do to not act badly, but you can spot it a mile off.
Yeah.
It's a funny thing.
Yeah. I think a lot of it,
because you don't see it these days. You pick anything on Netflix or BBC or anything like that, put it on, and it might be badly written or not a great series or whatever, but there's a baseline of acting ability now that's always reasonably good,
I've had to Google it, and amazingly I found it. There was a series called Randall and Hopkirk Deceased, and I remember watching this when I was young. But they must have had severe budget problems. So it was basically a British private detective who I think it was his partner had died, but came back as a ghost. and he would then help him solve all these sort of detective required plots. But more often than not, the guy who was living would get caught and put in a basement. And you could guarantee this basement was pretty much the same basement on every episode. And this is how they save money.
Yeah. Actually remade it, didn't they, with Reeves and Mortimer?
Yes, they did, yeah. That was quite brief, wasn't it, in the end?
I didn't watch any of the Reeves and Mortimer ones. Because I didn't think the original premise was very good.
All you need is a basement, and there you've got your plot. That was fine.
Yeah. When I was young, I used to really love a series called UFO. I thought it was brilliant, and there were some good stories in it. But again, the acting was quite dire at times. The costumes were a bit rubbish. But it was sort of Jerry Anderson production. Instead of using puppets, it used live actors.
Wow.
I think they'd have been better off with a puppet.
Well, someone told him there were no strings attached.
But
Proper wooden acting.
Oh, geez. Yeah. We're going to do a second series, because they did like a first series of like 26 episodes, and that's all they ever did. But apparently they had plans to do a second one, and then due to issues, it sort of like morphed into Space 1999, which I hated.
Oh dear!
I never liked it. I don't know what the fuss is about.
And on that positive note, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of Game and Gadget podcast number 26. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next time. Thank you to Tony and Steve for joining us, and we'll see you in the next Game and Gadget podcast.